Has Rachel Reeves saved herself while dooming the economy? I'll find out from Lord O'Neill. What do her tax rises mean for you? Dan Neidle will explain. Pippa and Screeney have the big economics and the big politics.
We'll see if Rachel Reeves has done enough to win over MPs, the markets and voters.
And with all the scores for what our friend Andy Haldane calls Reeves's strictly fiscal fandango, the Tory Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride, Labour's former Shadow Chancellor, again, John McDonnell, and Reform's Deputy Leader, Richard Tice. Watch out. In the run-up to this budget, the Chancellor's and Treasury's performance was more hapless than, let's think, Mr Bean. Unrealistic tax reforms and absurdly exaggerated OBR downgrades were leaked. She held a unique press conference to warn of fiscal Armageddon and prepare us for a manifesto-breaching rise in the basic rate of income tax, which in the end was kiboshed by the Prime Minister. And then, at the last, the budget was mistakenly published in its entirety by the Office for Budget Responsibility before she was able to reveal her secrets, or at least the few that remained, to MPs. It was all so incompetent that the chatter around Parliament has been that she and her boss Starmer are toast. But as Reeves herself routinely says, you count her down and out at your peril. She is the great survivor and has rescued herself with two decisions. First, to raise taxes by £26 billion to double her cushion, her headroom, to protect the public finances from unexpected shocks. The government's creditors have rewarded this return to some kind of prudence by buying gilts or government bonds in enough size that the yield or interest rate on public sector debt has fallen a bit. In that sense, she is the anti-Liz Truss. Also, she's remembered whatever left-wing roots she once had by imposing new taxes on owners of pricey homes, landlords, investors and savers, while transferring £3 billion to families on low incomes who have more than 2 children. In a nutshell, she's bought off MPs who wanted her replaced and reassured the nation's creditors, who fear that if she and Starmer were thrown out, they'd be replaced by lefty equivalents of Truss. Only one problem. She and Starmer were elected to revive the economy, to promote growth, and today she neither mentioned that or ambition, nor did anything much to promote it. She saved herself, but has she saved the country? Pippa.
Well, Robert, let's try to answer that by looking at the big picture. With today's £26 billion of tax rises, the Chancellor's more than doubled her headroom from 10 to £20 billion, which should help her get through some choppier economic waters. As you can see, this is still below the long-term average and way below the £80 billion that George Osborne gave himself back in 2014. But it puts her in a more secure position than last year. She didn't have to do this. After the productivity downgrade a few weeks ago, she still had about £6 billion worth of leeway. But this does mean that she's boosted her chances of meeting her fiscal rules if there's an economic shock, avoiding a doom loop of downgrades and tax rises for the rest of this Parliament. But not by a lot. This line shows the probability of meeting those rules. She now has a 59% chance of doing so, marginally better than a coin toss, but not much of an improvement for the 54% that she had before. But a lot of this hinges on tax rises, which only kick in just before the next general election. This chart shows how different measures impact borrowing. Everything above the line costs money, such as this, in light grey, changes to welfare, like lifting the 2-child limit. All of these things will go down well with the Labour Party. And below the line are all the things that could make money and therefore offset borrowing, like tax rises, in the yellow here. But look how she's delaying the pain. Personal tax measures increase most in 28-29 and 29-30, which is when the extension of the threshold freeze comes into effect. This should all please the bond vigilantes because it shows fiscal responsibility. But there's a big question over whether the Chancellor will really want to whack up taxes just before going to the polls. History suggests she won't, if indeed she's still in post. Robert, what do you make of her delaying the pain?
Well, I have literally never seen anything quite like it. This is the Treasury Red book, and I always look at the numbers at the end of a sort of series of tables which show you tax increases, spending increases. And the tax rises, as you pointed out, do not really properly kick in till 3 or 4 years from now, when, frankly, this is going to be a government campaigning in the general election. Now, do we really think that across a general election they will be saying to the public, we'll be putting up your taxes by, well, almost £25 billion? That seems deeply, deeply implausible. And then there are lots of other things going on at the end of the period, which, again, just don't really feel credible to me. Like she's inked in, this is something Jeremy Hunt had a habit of doing, she's inked in £4 billion of efficiency gains for the last year of this Parliament without giving us a clue where they are going to come from. So although markets, investors have reacted fairly positively today, I'm wondering whether they've actually looked at the small print, because quite a lot of this progress towards balancing the books, I'm not sure if she can deliver it.
Yeah, well, my WhatsApp messages have been pinging tonight with messages from Labour MPs who, for the most part, are feeling relieved by the budget and feel that Rachel Reeves has steadied the ship, for now at least. And I'm even told that cabinet ministers have been buying rounds of drinks in the bars of the House of Commons, that Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's chief of staff, popped in briefly and indeed had a word with Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. There's an interesting one for criminologists of the Labour Party. I don't know about that. But nevertheless, they think they've nailed the budget. And I think it's fair to say that Rachel Reeves has won herself, and therefore by extension the Prime Minister, a bit of breathing space by putting up taxes by £26 billion, which, of course, she said last year that she wouldn't do. But those same MPs that have been messaging are rather cautious, shall we say, about returning to their constituencies this weekend, talking to voters on the doorstep, fully conscious, of course, that those tax rises will have a direct impact on them.
Yeah, certainly right. And, I mean, you know, on young people and old people, fascinating, isn't it?
John, are you one of those Labour MPs that is relieved by this budget?
No one's offered to buy me a drink yet. That's where I'm disappointed.
That's for after the show.
Look, I was so pleased when they scrapped the 2-child limit. You know, I lost the whip over that. But it's taken them 18 months to reach the position where I think they're seeing sense around that. The issue is the tax threshold increase. And if you look at what the OBR is saying about disposable household income, it means whereas in previous years there was a prediction of a 3% growth, by the time we get to the end of the cycle now, it'll be 0.25%, 0.25%. And again, that means that people living standards will not improve and they'll still be going through a cost of living crisis. And with regard to the gamble up until 29-30, it is a gamble. Yeah. It is a gamble. And so everyone's anxious about whether or not we're looking at tax rises mid-term almost. So, yes, it's certainly brought some relief for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor until the May elections next year. And
do you think that they're the right leaders for the party now?
I don't go into personalities. I try to concentrate on the policies, and I just think we haven't gone far enough. She's dipped her toe into some taxation of wealth. We should have done that last year on a much greater scale, a proper wealth tax. I actually do think the fiscal rules, particularly the ones around protecting income tax for the wealthiest, the higher incomes, was a mistake. So I think there's been huge policy mistakes. But I just also think they begin to wake up to the fact they're a Labour government and we should be protecting the poorest. We should be lifting children out of poverty. We should be investing in our public services. So I think amongst the Parliamentary Labour Party at the moment, there's a sense of relief. But where do we go next?
Thanks, John. Thanks, Pippa. I'll be back to you in a minute or two. But first, I want to pick over some of the big points with distinguished economist Jim O'Neill, Lord O'Neill. Jim, quite a lot, I think, of how they have balanced the books or have met the fiscal rules looks like tooth fairy stuff to me. Do you genuinely believe that they can go into an election, you know, in a few years' time with these sorts of tax rises? Not to mention, you know, there are, you know, I mean, for example, you know, they've held business rates for the next few years, and then suddenly, before the election, they put them up again. I just don't believe that'll happen.
I mean, as you imply with what you've discussed already and these questions, even though technically, as evidenced by the gilt market, they've done what they needed to do to please the markets.
Will it hold, though, do you think, when investors look at the small print?
I'm sort of feeling a bit flat and disillusioned as a Brit that happens to have, got around this space, that it just seems so unambitious. So my answer to you is that I would predict that before the next election, the Manifesto pledge will be broken, and they might finally wake up and be bold enough, as I thought. If I would have been on here 2 months ago, I would have incorrectly said they would, do something about the triple lock, which more and more sane people are starting to dare say that, despite the fact it's been very generous, the country can't carry on with such crazy things. And I also thought they were going to go for proper property tax reform. As you know yourself, you put 6 economists in a room, this is the one thing out of virtually anything that all agree on. It's bonkers. And they float.
How unambitious they're being is bonkers, is what.
I mean, they're not taking on. If you really, really want to seriously persuade people that you're going to boost the long-term growth rate, then you've got to do something about the core things that really matter. The only thing that I think isn't getting any attention, which I do admire that for, and is sort of becoming a bit of her legacy, the commitment to put the notion of doing more on public sector investment spending definitely distinguishes her from many predecessors.
Sure.
However,
she didn't make the easy choices to cut investment, which George Osborne did, as we know.
But at the same time, and I've said, to people privately about it today, if you've got that rule and you've got these big events, why aren't you actually doing something more on that? Because of my day job, I'm pretty obsessed with various things to do with the North. We've had about 6 goes this year about Northern Powerhouse Rail is just around the corner. Did it get a mention?
Did not get a mention. But I want to talk about this whole growth agenda because Pippa's going to share some stuff with us.
Thanks, Robert. Rachel Reeves has long promised that her #1 priority is to boost economic growth. Strange, then, that she only mentioned it a handful of times in her speech. In the eyes of the OBR, none of the measures she announced had a sufficiently material impact for them to upgrade their growth forecast. Let's take a closer look at how all of this impacts on real household disposable incomes, how much money people have to spend. This chart shows the outlook for living standards, the pink line across the middle here, which has been revised down. Wage growth is slowing, which you can see here in the green blocks, levelling out over time. And taxes are going up. Both of these are squeezing household finances. Reeves has announced cost of living measures like a rise in the minimum wage, support for energy bills and a freeze in rail fares. But with the issue still so pressing for the public, you can see why some Labour MPs are still worried.
It is completely fascinating. And actually, before I return to Jim, there's another chart I think we've got, which I think we can put up, which shows what's happening to the tax burden. And because this is also incredibly striking, and you can see the tax burden as a result of these measures rising. We were already pretty much at record levels, and it's rising beyond that.
38%, I think.
Yeah. Can you take that much out of the economy in tax and simultaneously get the growth rate to rise significantly before the election?
Not unless you undertake what economists would describe as more serious supply side.
So talk about
reform.
the kind of structural reforms that you would like to see her do that they've so far shied away from.
So, as I sort of joked about, on reforming substantially the way we treat property tax.
So that would be what? Abolishing stamp duty?
Abolishing stamp duty, completely revamping maybe even the framework of how we tax land as opposed to the thing that's built on it.
Yep.
But even if you don't go that far, doing something seriously about revamping the whole council tax banding.
And so just literally whacking a new tax on a fairly limited number of more expensive houses. That doesn't go... Because it only raises 400 million.
It's tiny, and it plays, of course, as John's touched on, and that's partly why they've done it, it plays right into the Labour Party factional things going on. But in terms of really doing something of substance, it's meaningless. I got the impression a couple of months ago they were floating the idea of something way more ambitious. And it's well known that stamp duty is a really big disincentive to housing activity. And there's so many unfair things. So the whole taxation system doesn't work. And if you really want to get a much better functioning property market and one that would help boost social mobility even more, somebody is going to deal with that. And I'm pretty sure if they did, the OBR would revise up their long-term GDP forecast. Same thing on pension reform. You know, as they've shown probably today, I've not had a chance to look at it, but do frequently, the scale of the escalating cost to the taxpayer, which, by the way, one of your colleagues in advance of this asked me about student loan changes, which I had no idea about, so they did. So you're asking these young people...
I mean, it is rather extraordinary that as a result of the changes they've made today, that a young person on only the minimum wage will have to start paying back student loans, which is not what anybody assumed would happen when the system was created.
At the same time, we carry on with this bizarre protection of the triple lot. Yesterday, when I think the IFS published something in the FT, I thought, aye, from my vague understanding of how these things happen, that means something's going to give if they're doing it the day before.
Given that old people barely vote with Labour anymore, it's interesting that they're not prepared to take this.
But so I think those kind of things, and back to another big thing that you and I have chatted about before recently, this public sector investment rule and the whole way they created this new entity, NISTA, which is the merging of the infrastructure...
Which you were really optimistic about.
I think the Chancellor actually mentioned me in last year's budget as being one of a few people that influenced her about changing that so they could do more. But what is the point of creating it all and not doing anything with any of it?
So just explain to me, given your concerns and some of the issues around whether the fiscal targets are being seriously met, why do you think investors did buy gilts today? Why do you think gilt prices rose and the implicit interest rate played by the government?
I don't know. And I think you raised some pretty good points about how, I often used to believe in my days of when I was doing it 24/7 as an analyst, don't rush to make a judgment at a budget on day one, because you need to look at a lot of details.
It could unwind, in other words, in the next few
months. But the one thing that I do think was sensible, that again isn't getting a lot of discussion, I think the idea to get away from just two fiscal events to one is actually desperately needed, because we had, especially because the scope for the error was so small, they got themselves into this idiotic game that every time there's a monthly PSBR number comes out, the whole of the forecasting community and every politician in Westminster and you and everybody else is like, what are they going to do? And it just was like almost a weekly game, a monthly game. And so that might have played a role, because it was kind of stupid. So that might have given some leeway, and they have definitely made it pretty clear, at least so long as this Chancellor stays around, they are sticking to that rule. And I think the markets believe, as evidenced by the fact the rule itself seems to become more important than anything else. And so that's what bond investors care about, that, the equity market didn't go bonkers with excitement. And if it was really going to be a good budget, as somebody with my background, you'd expect the gilt market and the equity market to respond positively.
Yeah, so maybe it was just a relief that things weren't worse as it were. Let's just see how things pan out in the next few days. As always, Jim, thank you so much for coming
My pleasure.
in. I know you're only recently back from Africa, so it's a real treat to see you here. John, I want to pick up with you. I don't know if you noticed, but over the next 5 years, welfare spending is set to rise by £73 billion, which is, for example, by quite some margin, more than we spend on defence, more than we spend on schools, and that's just the increase. 35 billion of that is spending on older people, on retired people. 20 billion is disability payments. Is there any prospect of Labour finding a way to reduce that burden and allocate the funds elsewhere?
OK. Can I just comment on what was said about property taxation?
Yeah.
I'm the president of the land value taxation campaign, so I think we had an indication there might be a move towards land value taxation in some form. That never took place.
Yep.
There is a lack of ambition on that one.
Yep.
In terms of capital spend, exactly as has been said, They changed the fiscal rule to a net liability, so you could spend more because you took into account what you created.
And she hasn't cut back on what she announced
No,
last year, which she might have done
exactly
to make savings.
She's maintained that. It dips a bit and then comes back again. On welfare, the issue now is where you've got some flexibility is getting people back into work. That requires investment in the beginning that will then pay off.
Yeah.
That's what needs to happen now. Haven't seen much of that yet, and that'll be the discussion of the next few months.
Thanks, John. I'll be back to you in a minute. I'm delighted to be joined by the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. I've just mentioned to Jim and John this £73 billion rise in welfare spending to £406 billion by the end of the forecast period. £20 billion is an increase, as I was mentioning, in disability spending. £35 billion of that is related to spending related to triple lock and other spending on older people. That spending on older people is just unsustainable, isn't it?
Well, we remain committed to the triple lock.
I know, but
but
before the election, Mel, you
I was
very, very explicitly said the triple lock was not sustainable for the long term. I know you are committed, but come on, tell us the truth. You know, we cannot. You know, as the OBR itself has forecast in the last few months, we'll be bust if we don't tackle the triple lock.
So, no, what we've got to do is grow the economy, and what we've got to do is therefore get taxes down and control public spending so that we can do that, and then these things become more affordable. That's not what we're saying from this government. But the point that I was going to make about the triple lock is we too readily forget that under the last Labour government, we had the fourth highest level of pensioner poverty in Europe. And we also have with pensioners, Robert, people that are not easily able to change their economic circumstances. So they can't go out and get another job or work more hours or whatever it may be. They are stuck where they are.
Nobody is suggesting putting pensioners into poverty, but there are some interesting
some of the
plans.
Consequences would be there.
Well, no, there are interesting reform plans out there that would protect incomes, but would not lead to this incredible ratchet in spending on the triple lock.
So there are all sorts of different ways of doing it, but what you're suggesting is some way of cutting back the amount of support through the state pension that we provide to pensioners, and inevitably
cutting back on the increase.
That will have, well, they're pretty much
nobody's saying they should get
pretty
less
much
than
the
the rate
same
of
thing.
inflation.
So that means that through time you get less if you cut back on the increase than you would otherwise.
But their increase, I'm going to move on, but their increase has been greater than the increase in earnings over this period by quite a significant margin. So why should people in work actually receive less than people who are retired in terms of the annual increment?
So, as I say, the way to make sure that people in work are better off is to run an economy in which you get taxes down, you get the size of government down to facilitate that, you grow the economy, productivity, and you get higher real wages. And that has to be the route that we take. What you don't do is what this government has just announced in the budget today, which is to tax and increase taxes on work in order to transfer payments into benefits, the two-child benefit cap being abolished, being part of that story. That is not the way to grow the economy, increase employment, and get the incentives in the economy in the right place.
Now, one of the big things they did was to freeze personal allowances for another 3 years, which takes an extraordinary number of people into the higher rate tax bands.
Yeah.
At Tory conference, you said that you thought a fairer way to raise money would be to increase the rate at which we pay tax. Do you still think it would be a fairer way?
I didn't say this. I mean, I attended.
You've been widely reported as saying.
No, I know, and I've been widely
so
putting the record straight. So let me explain.
Okay.
So we had a discussion about what the options were that the Chancellor might have under various hypothetical situations.
Yeah.
We had a long discussion, and I made it very clear that the way forward was to get on top of government spending in order to get taxes down. That was the way forward. I was certainly not advocating that the Chancellor, which is how it was spun by some people that were in the room recording things.
No, I'm not.
Who knows who they were? I'm not saying.
But if you were presented with an inescapable, I think what people were saying is, if it was an inescapable choice between one or the other, and actually we're going to see later on, I think, that it is definitely fairer to put up rates than to freeze the thresholds, because the thresholds do lead to more injustices, as it were.
So the important thing is to get on top of spending, particularly welfare spending, where this government has already shown that it's incapable of doing that. When it tried to drive through some changes, the backbenchers revolted and they didn't manage to get that through. And they've run up the white flag in terms of controlling the benefits bill. Now, in the absence of doing that, it's hard to see how you can get those taxes down. But that is the answer, is to get the tax down. You were just looking at a chart a moment ago, I think, showing the tax burden over the next few years skyrocketing up to record levels. That is not sustainable in terms of having a healthy growing economy.
So on that, Mel,
Yeah.
you know, these threshold freezes would take us well into the next Parliament. Would you, in your manifesto, commit to end those freezes early?
So I'm not going to write a budget 4 years before a general election.
Sounds like a no, then, doesn't it? It sounds as though you wouldn't reverse.
No, we will have to assess the fiscal situation, obviously, at the time of hopefully winning the next general election and me delivering a budget. But I can't do that right now. But that was a breach of the Labour Party manifesto, the fact that they did that, which I think is one of the most
John whether he agrees with
significant things that's happened today.
in a minute. But annoyingly, we are almost out of time. You are the only major, well, as the official opposition anyway, you're the only major party who are formally opposing in all senses the abolition of the two-child limit on universal credit payments to poorer families. Why do you want to penalise poorer families in that way?
No, what we believe is that the best way out of poverty is through work, and that you need to get the incentives right in order to do that. We also think that when it comes to taxpayers, and they have to take decisions about whether they can afford to have a larger family or not, that it's only reasonable to expect that people on benefits should face similar decisions.
So when all the research shows this is the most efficient way to lift children out of poverty, you just reject that research, do you?
No, I believe, and my party believes, that the best thing is not to be on benefits. It is to be in work and to be part of a lower tax, higher growth, higher productivity economy that can provide the kind of real wages that can lift all out of poverty. Now, that is a substantial amount of the story between 2010 for over that decade that we were in power, was seeing people coming out of absolute poverty after housing costs.
Yeah, although relative poverty did increase.
Well, relative poverty is a very, very poor measure. You can have the economy deteriorate.
It's not a poor measure if you're struggling to pay the bills, and so many people
well, my point is that you can have people who are not in relative poverty 1 minute, suddenly the economy tanks and goes in the wrong direction. Everybody gets worse off, but magically they become out of relative poverty, when in fact they're actually worse off than they were before. And that's why absolute poverty after housing costs is the best measure, and we saw it decline from 2010 over that decade, principally because we created 4 million more jobs when we were in office during that time.
Mel, this debate is definitely going to continue. Annoyingly,
it could be a very long one.
We don't have time this moment to continue it. Thank you so much for coming in. Always a treat to see you. Now, don't go away, because we will be giving you everything you need to know about a budget that actually in many ways I think is, you know, one of the most important and significant of recent times. So come back in a minute and we'll unpick it all for you. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the break. Now, in celebration of the budget, we have prepared a budget trivia quiz for you, John. You'll be delighted to hear.
Oh, God.
So, right, let's rattle through a few questions. Check out your knowledge of all things budget. So, not every country measures GDP. Bhutan measures something else. Can you think what it might be?
I'm going to guess. If you don't know it, I think I
Go
know
on.
the answer. I reckon it's happiness.
Ah, do you agree?
I think it is.
It is.
Yes,
it's gross
it is,
national
actually.
happiness.
Yeah, yeah.
How about that?
How
That's
do I
good,
know?
isn't
Yeah.
it? Good idea.
We
Absolutely.
should try that one, shouldn't we?
We should, definitely.
Yeah.
We're pretty happy in the studio.
Yeah.
Next one is whose taxable income and assets does Finland publish every year?
I think we're going to know this one, aren't we?
Everybody, isn't
It's
it?
going to be the PM.
Yes,
isn't it?
John says everybody.
I think I would say the Prime
Yeah,
Minister.
it is everybody. It's
everybody.
The Finnish tax authorities
Yeah.
release an income day list where anyone can look up anyone else's taxable earnings.
Blimey.
Brilliant idea.
I
Let's
met
pay
them.
for
No,
it.
I met them and said that's what we'd do.
We should do that.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic
we
idea.
should,
Apparently,
yeah.
it's treated like a national spectacle.
And it really it
Probably got to
overcomes
be as
tax
rich as
avoidance.
Finland to get away with it, but none.
Well,
Purchase.
overcomes tax avoidance. as well.
National Jealousy Day. It's
And money
known as.
laundering, etc.
Right, which of these did the UK used to tax? We've got 30 seconds on this.
Yeah.
Did they used to tax hats, chimneys, soap, patterned wallpaper, or playing cards?
They definitely did hats at one point. didn't
Hats?
they? Yeah.
Any more to add?
Playing cards?
Playing cards, they actually taxed them all. And the most recent to go was playing cards, which were taxed until 1960. Last one for you, John. Which of those would be the most likely to be you to reintroduce?
All of them?
All of them. There we go. John's going to tax everything. Thanks very much.
You're saying a shot. Welcome back. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Neidle, who is a tax super brain, and we are going to kick off by looking at something we have been talking a bit about, which is when these revenues from these increased taxes come in. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about whether it's remotely plausible that so close to a general election taxes are going to go up as much as that. But we're also now, I think, going to see different amounts raised from different taxes, because I want to ask you about some of these. I suppose the first question I want to ask you is, you were really hopeful that this would be a budget in which we'd see some serious reform. Have we seen any serious reform?
We've seen none. The tax system is widely thought to be broken. There are think tanks on the left, think tanks on the right. They all agree. Property tax, broken. Corporation tax, vastly overcomplicated, badly broken. VAT, base too narrow. You can go on and on. Income tax, ridiculous high marginal rates.
She didn't fix any of that.
She didn't touch any of that. And if a government with a majority this large, in a hole as big as the one this one is in, isn't brave enough to try and do something that will drive growth with the tax system, I don't know when we're going to see tax reform.
Yeah, that it seems to be a very plausible and rather worrying analysis. But I do want to now look, because you will have thought already more than most people about how these different tax reforms might operate in practice. Now, one of the eye-catching ones is the £1.4 billion that she hopes to raise from charging owners of electric vehicles per mile, the number of miles they drive. Now, the reason she says she has to do that is because as we switch over to electric vehicles, she obviously gets much less from fuel duty, since obviously, you know, you're going to look pretty silly trying to put petrol in an electric vehicle. But how do you think in practice she'll work out how much we drive?
Yeah, this has been hovering over Chancellors for the last few years. It's about 24 billion we raised from fuel duty, and if nothing is done, that will drop by about half in 10 years. So something has to be done. There's the Economist's favourite approach, is you put a tiny little box in everyone's car and you charge them per mile.
And why isn't she doing that? Because I don't think she is doing that.
She's not doing that. It would be good, because then you could charge more for peak travel and less for off-peak, and it's all very efficient. She's not doing that, probably because the government doesn't want to take on an IT project that involves a little box in everyone's car. So instead, it's going to be a weird self-reporting system. where you pay your fuel duty, you say, I think I'm going to drive 10,000 miles this year. At the end of the year, there's a little true-up, and maybe you pay a bit more, maybe you get a refund. So you kind of self-report, and then the MOT garage will snitch on you if you got it wrong.
And is that right? I mean, it'll mostly be self-reporting. I mean, do you think HMRC is going to be coming and banging on our doors and asking to see our odometers?
No, they're relying on the MOT garages. They're even introducing some new mini MOTs for people in the first 3 years of a car's life, where normally you don't get an MOT. But they're conscious that you can probably buy a little box from China for £2 that will reset your odometer. So they're going to have new rules to combat that. Wouldn't surprise me if they confiscate your car if you fiddle with the odometer.
Now, one of the striking things about, I don't really know whether it is a mansion tax, everybody wants to call it that, but this is this new council tax levy graded on more expensive properties worth more than £2 million. Now, one of the things that I find very striking about it is how little it raises, £400 million. Why, I mean, could she have been more ambitious? Should she have been more ambitious with it?
If we do a chart of tomorrow's headlines, I bet you'll see the mansion tax pride of place in those. But as you say, it's a ridiculous little sliver. Why is it there? I think you can take a harsh view, which is this is politics. It gives the Labour backbenchers some red meat, we're hitting the wealthy. You can take a kind of view, which I think I do, which is council tax is broken. It's not fair that someone in a £100 million penthouse pays the same as someone in a fairly modest house. We should have more bans, but we're too cowardly to revalue council tax, so we'll kind of have this on top. It's a messy compromise.
And how, I mean, talking about messiness, I think we can normally spot when a property is worth 50 million or 100 million, but there will be quite a lot in a sort of grey area. Is it 1.9 million, or is it 2.1 million? Is this going to be a recipe for endless disputes with whoever's policing this?
It'd be interesting to see how they do it. They've got 2 years to build some kind of system. I expect they'll take property values from known transactions on the land registry. They'll mix that with maybe a bit of Google Maps, a bit of the planning system. They'll send you a letter saying, Robert, your house is worth 2.01 million. You'll then probably try and appeal it. Good time to be a valuer.
Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the very large sums of money, 8 billion from freezing the thresholds. And I think we've got another chart that we can show you about this. And the thing that I think is very striking is some work that the Resolution Foundation has done, which shows that if she had been bolder, stuck to her guns, and increased the basic rate of income tax as an alternative to this, that would have been more progressive. That would have been fairer. Do you agree with that analysis?
I think in tax world, we try to avoid the word fair. It's a four-letter word. Fair generally means I don't pay more tax and you do pay more tax. What the freeze does, what we've seen for the last 15 years, is a weird kind of progressive taxation where the median earner doesn't pay much more tax, and in fact has had a tax cut in the last 15 years. The top 20% of earners pay really quite a bit more tax. The top 10%, a lot more tax. The top 0.1%, kind of nothing. And if you put 1p on tax instead, you flip that. The very richest pay proportionately more. So it's a continuation of a strange conservative kind of progressive taxation that focuses on taxing the upper middle class.
Yeah, which is very interesting. There's tons more I would like to ask you, in particular about these changes to pension, to how they levy national insurance on pensions. But I think we'll have to do that another time, so you'll have to come back soon. Dan, I'm going to, though, I think, Pippa, you want to pick up on some of this with John, I think.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, John, isn't it, that tax rate rises look like they're more progressive than freezing thresholds. Do you think Rachel Reeves should have stuck to her guns and her plan to put up income tax rates? I mean, MPs like you were very worried about breaching Manifesto promises.
Yeah. Remember, the issue was not, the Manifesto commitment was not increasing the rate, OK? I would have actually increased the rate on the higher pay, above £80,000.
Same thing, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but you would have been more clear about who you were taxing. It would have been the wealthiest, basically. But in addition to that, I think there will be a bit of a backlash on the thresholds, because even though we've promised not to increase the rate, people think, well, income tax is going up in some form, and it will catch some of those people on the lowest of incomes bring them into the tax bracket for the first time. So I think there will be a bit of a backlash on that.
And you touched on wealth taxes earlier briefly with Robert. Obviously, we've seen the mansion tax, which has been discussed up there at Screeney, but also we know that there's a 2% increase on assets like dividends, property and savings. Is that just the start? Would you like to see Rachel Reeves go further with a more significant and deeper wealth tax?
Let me just explain what I think the politics of this are, because for the left, this is a huge achievement to both scrap the two-child limit, which we've been campaigning on for so long, and then for the first time to get this Chancellor to start looking at taxes on wealth. It's minor taxes on wealth, but at least it's the first step along the path. So I congratulate all those who have been lobbying like mad, individual MPs, even those who've lost the whip, those who've been campaigning in the Labour Party and beyond. I congratulate them. They've had a huge victory here, and it's one of the arguments for staying in the Labour Party.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks very much. I'm delighted that the Deputy Leader of Reform is with me, Richard Tice. I want to start with the abolition of the two-child limit on universal credit. You don't oppose the abolition in quite the way that the Tories do you?
Well, look, the Labour backbenchers are happy with what the Chancellor has announced today. Our position is much more sophisticated. What we're saying is for working families, two working parents, where they're on low incomes, receiving universal credit, there should be no limit. So it's a much more nuanced, sophisticated approach.
And what if you lose your job?
We think exactly, and that's actually one of the reasons why we take this approach, because a steel worker in Port Talbot with 3 children who loses their job is currently penalised. That was one of the things I was really focused on during this issue. So for us...
So if you lost your job, you would be able to retain it for a period, the extra...
Exactly, because you are... Because you were... That's the whole point of it. You were working...
but how long would you be able...
British nationals...
But it just feels very clunky, though.
No, it's not clunky at all. It's actually focusing on work, people who've shown a track record of work. And our cost...
But how long would it... But how long would you have to...
Let me finish, Robert.
OK.
And the cost is about 300 million a year, as opposed to over 3 billion a year. So there's a very big difference. We think it's smarter, more sophisticated, focuses on work, and you have a period because you're someone who was made redundant.
But how long is the period where, after you've been made redundant, you would continue to receive the extra
a sensible
money?
period so that someone can get back in, and that could be
what is the
whether that's
period?
well. Look, we will debate that exactly. I mean, whether it's 9 months, whether it's 15 months, it's of that sort of ilk. So there's a very sophisticated, important incentive there. But overall, this was a car crash of a budget, which has dramatically increased spending, much of it, in our view, wasteful, dramatically increased taxes. I mean, she's raised in 2 budgets 70 billion a year by the end of this period. But here's the real thing people are not focusing on enough, Robert, which is that this year already, 7 months into the last forecast, the borrowing forecast is up 21 billion in this financial year. That's almost 20%. Over the next 4 years, over 60 billion pounds, a dramatic increase. And you've touched earlier in the programme about many of these tax rises are delayed. But if the spending and the borrowing is short-term and those increases are happening now, then this government is going to have a major problem with the bond markets at some point in the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, we'll see, because it is interesting the extent to which the bond markets have been steady. In fact, bond prices have actually risen a bit. But we'll come back to this. Tons more I need to talk to you about. Don't go away, Richard. And don't any of you go away, because, as I say, if you want to understand this budget, this is the place to be. See you in a minute.
Welcome to the break. For more fun, there's been a lot of talk at this budget about drinks. And as was announced this morning, the UK's sugar tax is going to be extended to include more soft drinks, Iron Brew amongst them. As a Scot, I noticed that one, as well as milkshakes and pre-packaged coffees. Now, John and Richard, what's your sweet treat of choice? And what would you be most sad for the sugar tax to be extended to? John?
Mars bars.
Mars bars.
Yeah, it's an
OK.
addiction, sorry.
Ah, addiction.
Yeah,
Didn't know
it
that.
is,
But it must be, there must
we
be a
share
sugar tax
things.
on it, mustn't it?
John and I share unusual things. I am a Mars bar addiction. I mean, that is one of my key addictions. Mars bars and Twixes. So
Right.
I'd be
and
very
Twixes.
sad
I was
about
going to
that.
say,
Well, you're on
other
Twixes.
chocolate bars are available.
It used
of course.
it used to be Kit Kats, but I've moved into Mars bars. It's
You've got all the strong stuff.
higher concentration.
And no wonder the vending machines in the House of Commons are always empty. Now I know why. Richard, milkshakes seem to be used as the drink of choice against your leader, Nigel
Yes.
Farage. How did he feel about the sugar tax changes
Well,
today?
we don't like sort of taxes and banning things and things. And so all of these, I mean, I'm very concerned, obviously, I'm a big sort of coffee drinker. So yeah, I think we just got to, everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation. OK, we're on to the strong stuff now, because, of course, there's a particularly famous drink associated with the budget. By tradition, the Chancellor can have a glass of alcohol next to him at the dispatch box. But Ken Clarke wasn't it, the last Chancellor that actually did that, I think.
Yeah, he did.
Richard, if reform were to win the next election, are we right in saying that you'd be Chancellor?
Well, that's for the boss to decide. So don't
Right, well, I'm
prejudge
going
it.
to make an assumption
But,
that you're going to be Chancellor. To both of you, and you, of course, were Shadow Chancellor, John, for the Labour Party, would you have a drink at the dispatch box? And what would your drink of choice be?
I think it would be quite fun, just to sort of sometimes to reactivate traditions. For me, it wouldn't be a spirit. I'm not a spirit.
Glass of wine, pint of beer?
Possibly a low alcohol wine, something like that.
All right, OK.
Just as a sort of deference. Yeah, exactly. I didn't say I would drink it.
And John, what about you?
We're going to get hammered by those people campaigning against alcohol problems and all the rest of it. I would have a Jameson's, yeah.
The Jamesons, excellent. OK, now very quickly, we're going to...
Be true to yourself,
We've got 30
that's the
seconds
point.
for this. So we're going to we'd like to match the Chancellor to the drink. Can you read these? Rum and milk, whiskey, gin and tonic, white wine spritzer, sherry and egg. Geoffrey Howe, what do you reckon? What did he drink?
Gin and tonic.
Gin and tonic. John is right, absolutely. Nigel Lawson, what did he have?
I'm going to say a spritzer.
Rum and
Yeah,
milk.
I think a white wine.
Robert's
spritzer,
right,
yeah.
15 seconds left. Ken Clarke, we all know the answer to that one. It's,
Whiskey.
of course, the whiskey.
Whiskey.
William Gladstone liked
Sherry and egg.
Rum and milk.
sherry
Sherry
and
and
egg.
egg.
And then
Sherry and
last
egg, yeah.
one, Hugh Dalton
Well, we
White
rum and
wine.
milk.
will be rum and milk.
yeah.
There we go. Thanks very much.
That's interesting. Welcome back. The Deputy Leader of Reform is still with me. One of the things I have been pointing out all evening is that if you look at a 70+ billion rise in welfare spending over the next 5 years, that's in the OBR's leaked but nonetheless still authoritative book, 35 billion of that is spending on retirement benefits. It's the triple lock, it's other forms of help for older people. You are the only party who has at least mooted the idea that the triple lock is unsustainable. Have you got any ideas yet how to curb the degree of spending on it?
Look, in a sense, everybody wants to be able to pay higher pensions, but if we can't create any growth, and this government's not creating any growth, it's flatlining, and growth forecasts have been already downgraded.
Can we afford,
Well,
for old
you can only afford,
however fast we grow the
reality is,
economy,
Robert, look,
they will still take more and more of
reality
the
is
cake.
you can only afford anything if you are growing and if you are bringing debts back under control. And this government is not. So we've said, look, we can't guarantee it. Of course, everybody would like to pay it, but we've got to be honest with people, say nothing's affordable unless you create growth and unless you stop taxing people out of existence.
Yeah.
That's what really concerns us. There's another point which hasn't been raised at all. As you well know, I'm very concerned that the Bank of England is paying interest on these QE reserves. Tucked away in that document, an extra £30 billion on the previous forecast just 7 months ago, spent by the Bank of England of taxpayers' cash. This is real money that we shouldn't be paying.
Can I ask John about this? I mean, talking to a number of your colleagues,
Yeah.
and they're not, frankly, I'm talking about people, in this case, quite a lot of them on the right of the party, they are staggered that the Chancellor didn't take any money in additional tax from the banks. Why do you think she backed off doing that?
I have two reasons by the sound of it. I think it's true that she wanted the banks not to lay into her. She wanted some praise and all the rest.
But that's ridiculous.
I agree.
You can't lay off a set of institutions in the hope they're going to say nice things.
No, I agree, and I think it was a real mistake. That's the first thing. And the second thing, on this issue with regard to the Bank of England and the bank reserves held by the Bank of England, I have no understanding. I agree why we're paying debt on that. And again, it's not, I think, the reason that wasn't moved on. They don't want to upset the Bank of England. I just think you need to be braver as a Chancellor on these sort of issues. Yeah. And I think the public would back you.
The truth is that they didn't want to say that actually Tice and Reform are right on this issue. The Governor of the Bank of England said it's a fiscal decision. The Chancellor and the Bank and the Commons should take that decision. OK, well, so you've showed off a bit, but I need to ask you some other questions. This is for both of you. My jaw literally dropped when, almost an hour before she stood up, this thing was online. I mean, do you think it's such a leak, right? I mean, are the positions of the bosses at the OBR, are their positions sustainable?
Hugh Dalton, that Labour Chancellor after the Second World War, just mentioned something as he walked into the chamber and resigned. Yeah, he did. And resigned as a result. I think this is significant. I think heads are going to have to roll. It was so significant. I had it on my screen and I'd stopped listening to the Chancellor because I was reading it in the OBR almost exactly.
I was live on air trying to work out, should I read page 142 of the book or listen to her?
But there has to be some accountability, particularly when the OBR has such a massive role now. I mean, essentially, the OBR almost writes the budget.
All this stuff is price sensitive. It was,
of course.
It was picked up by the gilts market 45 minutes before it was supposed to be.
Quite rightly, the Chancellor was very angry, and I think it was very, very tough for her. And heads must roll. There has to be some accountability. It's called the Office for Budget Responsibility. Take some responsibility.
Now, I've got to ask you about a completely separate issue. I know it was a long time ago, but Nigel Farage at school has been accused of saying some deeply hurtful things by a number of pupils who claim that he said, seriously horrible anti-Semitic and racist things. Why won't he just straightforwardly say, I'm sorry?
Because I think, frankly, these allegations have been out there before. This is just...
But these are people who are going on the record, and you can... Are they liars?
I think it's a load of old nonsense.
Do you?
Yeah, I really do. And isn't it funny how the people who've actually allowed themselves to be named have got serious political bias against Nigel Farage? I really do think this. And all of a sudden, you've got 15 to 20 people who want to remain anonymous. Come on, this is ludicrous.
Well, Pippa knows about this
because 49 years ago.
The Guardian did that story. Do you think all the people coming out saying these things from Nigel Farage's school days have all got an axe to grind of a political thought?
We wouldn't have published them unless we had a clear conscience that it was in the public interest, that what they were telling us was accurate. Of the over 20 individuals, more than half were on the record. I think it's very difficult for Nigel Farage to turn around and deny that he was responsible for some of that behaviour.
I mean, lots of people do stupid things, hurtful things when they're kids. The normal thing to do when you're called out is to say sorry.
No, and Nigel has said, if he said anything, what may be banter or whatever, he said he might have done, but the clear point that he's absolutely resolute about is that these allegations are false in their core narrative. And I think, look, at the end of the day, we understand why our political enemies are running it. We're leading in all the polls, and we're doing exceptionally well. We've won more by-elections since May the 1st than the Tories and Labour put together. I think it's...
Well, we'll see if he's right to sort of dismiss it in this way. But, Richard, great to see you. Great to see you, John. Thanks, Pippa, for everything tonight. That's it. Reeves has served up what many have called a smorgasbord of assorted tax rises. We don't yet quite know how many are delicacies and which are rotten, stinking fish, as a senior Labour person put it to me. Tune in next week when you might find out. Bon appétit. Bye-bye.